remember that they're changing my voice. This is part 2. Please see part 1 and think motive, formula, model, and output. And compare part 1 to what they're doing now, right? The points line up. For example, instead of the War on Poverty plan, there's the absence of the War on Poverty plan and the absence of them effectively regulating the healthcare sector while increasing government efficiency with no ulterior motives. How do they look when there is an absence of vice taxes, as vice taxes make it more clear that vices are wrong? They could also use the money to build rehabs. So where are the vice taxes? Where are the pet food taxes and the junk food taxes? Just 1% here, 5% there, where it makes sense. Affordable taxes, especially when the War on Poverty plan is helping the poorest of Americans, the poorest of people, what have you. And that's point number 1. Point number 2, the absence of a global farming program points to the ugliness of the existing white, Jewish, and LGBT spirits, as 9 million people starve to death a year, and it changes the nature of their spirits. Now, again, this is not to offend them. I'm just kicking the facts here. Okay, when your spirit includes a lack of action, a lack of being proactive in regards to solving the preventable and obvious problems in society, and your spirit has a certain ugliness to it, regardless of how ugly you think your spirit is, it has a certain ugliness to it. The spirit of universal pinpointed moral precision is greater than any racial spirit, okay? Because all races are doing the wrong thing on the spectrum as groups. So why do people spend so much money on fancy things if image does not matter to them? Image is affecting their life, their quality of living. That's why they call it guilt, right? White guilt. Denial is not a river in Egypt. So if you think that all that matters is you have lots of money and the image doesn't matter, why do people spend like $63 billion, I believe it is, on jewelry in America every year? Why is that? Well, the fancy cars and clothes, and on and on and on. Houses and boats. Who are you trying to impress, and why are you trying to impress them? Because a huge reason why people want lots of money is because they want to look good. And the absence of the War on Poverty plan and the absence of global farming program makes rich people look bad, especially whites, Jews, and LGBT, because of association. So is your model really better than mine for your groups? No. And I challenge you to a debate on this topic. Point number 3. People know that they could treat the poor more fairly and that they still would be rich. They are doing things in a way that makes them feel the urge to be sadistic, and it is like a drug addiction for them. So people know that they have blood money. A lot of people know there's going to be robots soon. People know that they could still be rich and solve a lot of problems for the poor. So their image includes being sadistic, trying to derive pleasure from causing people to suffer. It clearly includes that. And the Marquis de Sade isn't exactly the most popular person in history or the most respected person. The vast majority of people think he was a very, very evil and sick person when they become aware of him. At least the vast majority of people who are aware of who he is, that is. That's where we get the word sadistic from the Marquis de Sade. And the word sadistic has negative connotations. There's disorders named after, they believe it's called sexual sadism disorder or sadistic disorder, whatever it is. Okay. Point number 4. When one does not see romantic justice, one ends up having a low opinion of the groups one feels are responsible for the absence of romantic justice. So again, when you don't see romantic justice, you say, okay, who runs the society? Well, I see a bunch of white rich people, Jewish rich people, LGBT people having their way disproportionately. They say that must have something to do with them, and they look bad, and they know that they look bad. It affects their quality of living. And why do people want lots of money? To improve their quality of living. So life isn't just about getting some airhead who's willing to date some cruel rich person and having lots of money. Okay? It's about why you're here in the first place. It's about quality of living, what have you. This is central in my argument about why my model is better than your models. Specifically in your existing model and the trajectory of it. When people try to pretend that they are magically the exception to the rule, people see through that, and even though they may be confused about how to explain it, or if they should try to explain it, or both, they still have a low opinion of the people or groups that are getting over. Point number 5. People know that gang stalking is pathetic, and they think that it is pathetic that people are playing stupid about it. They don't respect that. I've never met anybody who has argued that they respect gang stalking. They usually argue they don't think it exists, or that they think it's stupid and they know it exists. And when they argue they think it doesn't exist, they say, why would anyone do that? Because it's so stupid, and it makes the people doing it look very bad, and it makes the type of people that we suspect as being behind it look bad. Point number 6. Oh, and by the way, that affects their quality of living. Point number 6. With the absence of a famous ideal person comes the presence of the belief that one should hate the governing group. So when you look at society, you're like, man, this all sucks. And nobody who's famous looks good. And they don't believe that your fairy depiction of Jesus is magically, Jesus. So they say, well, who do they look up to? Right? No offense to the president. I try very hard not to offend the president these days as a matter of strategy for nothing else. And I hope that one day we could work together. Maybe it's wishful thinking. But I don't rely on that, but I hope for that. But they don't respect any politician, any rich person. I mean, the vast, vast majority of people don't respect them, and it affects their quality of living. And using psychology to pretend does not work. I've never seen anybody on this planet use psychology effectively to pretend that things are going well in their life and therefore have some kind of happy life. It doesn't work like that way. It never has worked that way. There's a difference between being giddy and insane and knowing something's wrong on various levels and actually having a happy life. And the absence of these people having a single respectable, famous person costs them dearly. People hate the governing groups. They say, why can't they produce a single valid leader? Especially now that we live in these very dark times. Who do they rally to? They don't know who to rally to. And they resent the governing class, they resent the rich, and there's certain associations that don't work in the favor of white, Jewish, and LGBT people. Point number 7. High crime rates with no excuse disgrace individuals, groups, and nations. Point number 8. Corporate crime is one of the most disgusting things out there. What do the over 22.5 millionaires and billionaires in America get out of it? Money isn't everything, and dark hearts ruin families, and everyone knows it. I can't stress that enough. Point number 9. Every developed nation has an advanced military or something close to it. But none of them have a cause worth killing or dying for. And I'm not trying to insult anybody in this video, just pointing it out, right? I think Tulsi Gabbard, I believe it was, pointed out that the troops are being treated poorly. This is bad for people's minds, bodies, souls, and spirits. One is better off admitting one's mistakes and accepting the blows to their ego than trying to play it, rather than trying to play it off and having dirty insides. Point number 10, the destruction of the earth is a complete disgrace, and you all know it. Pollution is a problem, and the fact that people are playing stupid about that, the fact that people are confusing things, it's a propaganda game they're playing in the various political factions and various groupings in society, is very, very sick. So their model is clearly inferior to mine. My model is superior to theirs. Also ask me about my $400 billion plan, my $500 billion plan. Ask me about government spending and the definitions of welfare and the welfare wordplay game they're playing in order to try to blame the poor for their mismanagement of $6.9 trillion. For example, Section 8, really quickly here, cute little fact here. In 2024, I believe it is, we spent like only $32 billion, if I remember correctly, on Section 8. Or in recent years, one of these recent years, we spent like $32 billion in Section 8 housing. How does that compare to $6.9 trillion? And on snaps, I believe it's in 2023, those food stamps, we spent like $122.8 billion on snaps. How does that compare to the $6.9 trillion spent by the federal government? Now, there's other programs that are said to be welfare, like Social Security, but it's not the same as welfare. Medicaid and Medicare, it's not the same thing. You don't think of, Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security as a free handout. You think of it as an essential service that the government has to provide as a result of their unfair system. And there's other kind of programs that have to do with rental assistance besides Section 8, things of that nature, if I'm not mistaken, that are called different things. But ultimately, we're not spending that much money on them. The vast majority of the $6.9 trillion, is being spent on other things. Being spent on Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, paying off the interest on the debt, that has to do with budgeting and managing money, governing, has to do with governance. And the governing class and the government officials as individuals, politicians, the three branches of government, has to do with these things, right? The iron triangle of sociology and economics and politics, right? The lobbyists, the bureaucrats, the corporations, what have you. It has to do with these things. It does not have to do with a poor person saying, hey, do I get my welfare check or not, when it's hardly factoring in here. Thank you.